Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert here at the Listening Post. This week, another bin Laden tape goes to air on Al Jazeera.
من أسامة إلى أوباما.
Cue the questions on whether broadcasting it is good journalism. Italy, under Berlusconi, where posting videos online, even watching them, could become illegal. Venezuela under Chavez and the latest chapter in the media war there. And the Listening Post goes to the Philippines.
It's an event which has shocked a nation.
Scene of the worst mass murder of journalists in history. The Al-Qaeda leader called it a message from Osama to Obama. It was an audio tape, the first time we've heard bin Laden's voice since September of last year. Like many other tapes, bin Laden's latest release was delivered to Al Jazeera. And just as before, it set off a debate both inside and outside the network on whether it should be broadcast. Ever since the 9/11 attacks, Al Jazeera has often been the network Al-Qaeda has chosen to deliver its messages to the Arab and Muslim worlds, knowing that those messages would eventually reach international audiences and get the attention of Washington. The network has been criticized for broadcasting the tapes in a way that other news organizations have not, when they have broadcast or published material from similar groups. That's where we begin this week's News Divide, with the bin Laden tapes and the editorial questions that arise when those tapes find their way to Al Jazeera.
أكد أسامة بن لادن زعيم تنظيم القاعدة
You have a bin Laden tape.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Well, the basic question is it newsworthy? Is it relevant?
من أسامة إلى أوباما.
What is new about the tape?
سلام على من اتبع الهدى.
Does it show our viewers something they need to know?
وإن الرسالة المراد.
Is it going to lead to terrorism or to violence?
وهي لن تحلم أمريكا بالأمن.
Do we even know whether the tape is real?
On that question of authenticity, the editor-in-chief of Al Jazeera's Arabic news channel.
We have developed a sort of a mechanism when we receive any tape through which we decide whether this tape is authentic. We have the experience to tell whether this is really bin Laden or not. And then we decide which parts of it should be put on air and which parts are just mere propaganda and which shouldn't go on our screen.
This is what bin Laden had to say.
On this most recent tape, Al Jazeera says it aired almost all of it, only editing out some verses and greetings from the Quran. Bin Laden used the message to prove he was still alive by referring to a recent news story, then putting his spin on it.
Osama bin Laden.
What was significant about this tape, above all, was that bin Laden was trying to assert that he was somehow responsible for the Christmas Day failed bomb attack in the plane over Detroit.
Of a flight bound for Detroit on December 25th.
The bombing incident on Christmas Day was an abject failure. It wasn't a success. Yet there is clearly a desire to kind of say, no, this was still a success. You know, we've still struck fear into the hearts of Americans and Westerners.
So, if that was what was motivating the Al-Qaeda leader, why did Al Jazeera deem the tape worthy of broadcasting?
Because it is going to put more pressure on the US president to take more drastic action against so-called terrorists and terror actions. And we thought that it was also important to tell the world that he is still active and he is still there and he still has something to say.
The counter-argument is that, well, this is bin Laden's plan, it's bin Laden's attempt to get his message out, and what's happening at Al Jazeera is falling into that. I think it's a difficult call, because if you don't air these tapes, then people don't have a clue what the latest information is. And surely the public have a right to know, and that's the kind of job of the media.
That is not how the Bush administration saw it.
We know that Al Jazeera has a pattern of playing propaganda over and over and over again.
After the 9/11 attacks, Al Jazeera was repeatedly accused of being an Al-Qaeda propaganda outlet, particularly when the network aired bin Laden tapes. What few people realize, however, is that Al Jazeera was airing bin Laden's messages long before 9/11.
Prior to the existence of Al Jazeera, bin Laden would send communications about himself to Arab TV networks, but he was consistently ignored because Arab networks viewed bin Laden as too destabilizing an influence in the Middle East. When Al Jazeera began in 1996, it took the view that everyone should have a voice, and that included bin Laden. And so quickly he and other groups like him realized that this was a place where they could get heard.
The general kind of lay, uninformed view is that Al Jazeera has an agenda. It's anti-American, it's anti-Western, anti-Israeli. And I think in that context, the bin Laden tapes only reinforces this feeling that, well, they're working with bin Laden and they're just trying to support his cause.
When I was researching my book on Al Jazeera, I didn't detect any ideological sympathy between Al Jazeera and Al-Qaeda. I believe that the relationship between Al Jazeera and Al-Qaeda is rather like the relationship was between the BBC and the IRA.
Throughout the era of sectarian violence in Northern Ireland, in which the Irish Republican Army was fighting against British rule,
the IRA bombers returned.
The IRA routinely used Britain's publicly funded broadcaster, the BBC, to broadcast its communiques, to get its message out. Martin Bell covered that story for the BBC.
There is no more an affinity, in my view, between Al-Qaeda and Al Jazeera than there was between the BBC and the IRA. The revolutionary organization, in each case, is using or trying to get access through the broadcast, which it thinks has the most reach and the most credibility. The BBC is the national broadcaster of the United Kingdom. Al Jazeera is one of the best-known networks in the world. So I don't think you have to look for conspiracy theories. It's just fairly smart media relations.
The man shot and wounded.
The BBC knew how to find the IRA, interviewed IRA killers, but there was no sympathy within the BBC for the IRA. It was simply that they were doing their job. And bin Laden obviously is a voice that needs to be heard.
It would be one thing if Al Jazeera was the only network putting Osama bin Laden's tapes on the air, but it's not.
When we broadcast these tapes, why does everybody rally to take them and put them on air? Aren't they, in this case, turning themselves into other mouthpieces for bin Laden? I wonder.
And every time other news organizations broadcast the bin Laden tapes, they have to credit Al Jazeera and show the network's logo. In doing so, they are recognizing implicitly that Al Jazeera broke the story.
The airing of the tapes will only really add to the credibility, simply because people will feel on the ground that these guys clearly have access that the West doesn't to these networks. And that's, from a journalistic perspective, that's a good thing.
في حال استمر الدعم الأمريكي للإسرائيليين.
I think you should be very robust in defense of your right to broadcast these tapes so long as you are sure that they are authentic. People have a right to be informed. They don't have a right to be lied to and to have the truth hidden from them. But if you get an example, if you become an example of a television network that can be intimidated by a lobby group or vociferous critics, then that is the way to self-censorship, and you don't want to do that.
In other words, when Al Jazeera or the BBC broadcasts someone's message, it's not because the journalists there agree with the message. They do it because it's news. Here's how our Global Village voices see the decision to put the bin Laden tapes on the air.
If a news organization were to receive audio tapes purportedly from Osama bin Laden, who is arguably the most wanted man in the world, it would be irresponsible on their behalf to not broadcast these tapes. Al Jazeera has received criticism for airing these tapes throughout the years, but it would be an outrage in the West if a Western news organization were in the same position as Al Jazeera but refused to broadcast the audio tapes.
It's a news story, and we may be at the point where emotion has been trumped by interest, although in this case, bin Laden continues to fade into the distant past. Many Americans are probably annoyed more by the fact that he's still at large than by the fact that an Arabic media station broadcast the tape.
What's ironic about this is Al Jazeera is not really just an Arab station anymore. It's actually an international, cosmopolitan voice in a very important global conversation. And by trying to silence the voice that it represents and the voices that it can bring that other news organizations can't reach, you're actually making it that much harder to have an informed conversation about the most crucial issue of the day.
If you've got an opinion on the media that you'd like to get on the air as one of our Global Village voices, we suggest you join the thousands of our viewers who now follow us on Facebook and Twitter. They use those sites to find out what stories we're working on so they can weigh in. Or you can just get in touch with us via email at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. This is your chance to stop yelling at your television set and start talking to your webcam. It's better for you. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Between the 3 channels he owns and the 3 state-funded channels he oversees as Prime Minister, Italy's Silvio Berlusconi effectively controls 6 of the country's 7 terrestrial television channels. Now he's looking to get control of online video content, such as that on YouTube. The Berlusconi government is trying to pass new laws that would require anyone in Italy who wants to upload a video to acquire official authorization, like a television channel would. And the law would also make it illegal for Italians to watch online video that their government disapproves of. The government says it is merely trying to adhere to a 2007 European Union directive that requires it to regulate new media, and the government says it's not trying to censor the right to information online. However, critics of the law argue that this is just another attempt by Berlusconi to tighten his grip on the media in Italy. The ongoing battle between Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez and RCTV, the opposition Radio Caracas television station, has meant that the channel has been dropped once again by cable companies in the country. The Chavez government denied RCTV a cable licensing renewal in 2007 over the channel's backing of a coup against Chavez back in 2002. This time, RCTV insists it is not subject to Venezuelan broadcasting regulations, since the channel has moved its operation to Miami. The government does not buy that argument. It says RCTV was dropped because it broke media rules, including its refusal to air some of Chavez's speeches. In a carefully worded statement, the leader of Venezuelan's journalists' union spoke out against the abuse of authority taking place, which he said was very dangerous for public freedoms in the country. U.S. President Barack Obama can use all the friends he can get in the American media, and he's just lost some. Air America Radio is off the air. The liberal talk radio network was launched in 2004, designed to provide an alternative to right-wing talk radio hosts like Rush Limbaugh, who dominate the format in the U.S. But the network never found the audience and the advertising revenues it needed to survive, so it's declared bankruptcy and shut down. One conservative pundit wrote that the passing of Air America is another reminder that our nation is center-right. 2 of the network's alumni have gone on to better things, though. Comedian Al Franken is now a U.S. Senator representing the state of Minnesota, and another former host, Rachel Maddow, has her own critically acclaimed show on the 24-hour television news network, MSNBC. The blogosphere has found an unlikely advocate in Pope Benedict XVI. Reports from Vatican City say the Pope will use his World Communications Day message in May to urge priests and bishops to get online and start blogging. The 82-year-old pontiff is said to see new media as a useful tool to preach the gospel and encourage a dialogue between Catholics and their church. Although there are plenty of religious groups already using blogs and other forms of new media, the Pope's plea is considered to be the first of its type by a global religious leader. The winner of the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition has been stripped of his title after judges decided that the subject of his winning photograph wasn't wild after all. Spaniard Jose Luis Rodriguez won the prize for this image of an Iberian wolf leaping over a fence. It's a great shot, but after it won, it attracted suspicion. Wildlife experts said that a wild wolf would not bother to jump over a barricade when it could simply squeeze between the bars. The theory now is that the animal is called Ocean. He's a trained wolf, tamed and available for hire from a nature park near Madrid. We're back after the break with a report on the biggest media massacre the world has ever seen. Welcome back. It was a gruesome milestone in the history of the news media. The dateline was Maguindanao in the Philippines. About 2 months ago, on November 23rd, more than 30 journalists were killed. They were caught up in a political massacre there. Never had so many media workers been killed at one time. Although the story of the killings is still front-page news in Manila, it has largely disappeared in media around the globe. We're doing 2 reports on this story, the second of which will run next week. In the first, here's the Listening Post's Simon Ostrowski from the scene of the crime.
A peacetime nation, an Asian democracy, and the most dangerous place on the planet to be a journalist. This is the island nation of the Philippines, and at the end of last year, it was shaken by the worst violence against members of the media, anytime, anywhere.
They came to grieve, to see firsthand the place where their loved ones were slain.
It's an event which has shocked a nation. Political workers and journalists all executed as they followed a politician who was simply registering to run for office.
Almost 50% of our forces here in local media are gone. because of that massacre.
It's either you accept the bribe or you accept a bullet.
November 23, 2009 is not a date that will soon be forgotten in the Philippines. 57 people, including 31 journalists, were executed as they traveled to register the elections paperwork of a man who dared to run against a candidate from the local ruling clan. Now Philippines President Gloria Arroyo is under intense pressure to deliver justice to the victims because the alleged perpetrators were her political allies.
Journalists have been murdered by the dozen in the Philippines for years, and few, if any, of those cases are ever solved. But the November massacre, in which over 30 members of the media were killed, has made the Philippines the worst place on earth to try to get the story out.
The Philippines may be the most dangerous place on earth to be a journalist, but on the southern island of Mindanao, the Muslim region of Maguindanao is the most dangerous place in the most dangerous place. Over 90% of the media workers killed in the line of duty die on this island. Years of sectarian conflict in Maguindanao have made life cheap there. But a pre-elections massacre on such a scale shocked even this nation and caught the attention of the international media.
Today, I want to tell you, you are not alone. The Philippines is now the most dangerous country in the world for journalists to work, and that must end.
Even before the massacre, the press death toll in this country was high. Media protection groups say they can document 67 murders that have taken place just since President Gloria Arroyo came to power in 2001. If those figures are correct, the massacre has pushed that number to a staggering 98 media workers killed.
Most certainly, the Philippines right now is the most dangerous country in the world for journalists to work in. And that's an absolute tragedy because especially when we have this lead up for the next 6 months to the elections on May 10, it's a time when everyone needs to be getting information from their media about what's going on. When journalists are gunned down like this, that's a blow to democracy. We certainly need to have the media strengthened and protected so they can do their job.
But the security situation means many local journalists prefer to keep a low profile instead.
Journalists in Mindanao, for instance, covering Maguindanao, usually don't report because they know that their lives are at stake if they really do serious investigative work. So it's really a huge challenge for journalists to do investigative pieces about local politicians or even about big business interests, because big business interests have links also with politicians and with the militaries.
Meanwhile, human rights groups blame the government for not doing enough to prosecute those who order the murders, especially when the suspects are corrupt officials.
The problem of impunity, systemic impunity in the Philippines, is really, really serious. Most of the cases are not investigated. The ones that are investigated are sometimes investigated so poorly that the prosecution cannot build a case.
I wanted to find out how officials reacted when they were criticized for their low conviction rates.
They're saying that our hands are tied, it should be the police, it should be the military or whoever, and then the finger pointing goes on. So it's not even a question of accountability. It's like public officials would tell you, no, that's not our jurisdiction.
But at the Department of Justice, an official told me statistics for murdered journalists were inflated, and successful prosecutions were ignored by the press.
So you have all the cases of these journalists being killed landing on the front page of the newspapers, and when the suspect is arrested, nobody writes about it. So obviously, the general impression is it's not being attended to. We're only tracking 43 cases, and only 5 have not started trial. The rest are undergoing trial.
If there are, as you say, 43 ongoing cases and there's only been 1 conviction, I mean, those odds don't sound very good to me as a working journalist.
No, I said only during my time, the conviction came during my time. There were 4 other convictions earlier.
I still didn't like those odds, and after the massacre, they'd only gotten worse. Andalam Patuan Jr., the man accused of masterminding the Maguindanao massacre, is now facing multiple murder charges with a few of his high-profile cohorts. But the implications of the crime go far beyond the borders of Maguindanao. The question is, will Filipino prosecutors be bold enough to look beyond who pulled the trigger and cast their nets wide enough to bring in all those responsible for the world's worst political violence against the media?
More Global Village Voices now on the media in the Philippines.
I believe this was more of a political attack against among the Datu family. Lawyers and media were just in the way. 99 journalists have been killed since 2001, not accounting for Maguindanao. This was a horrible attack. I expressed my outrage to social media and continue to be vigilant. Social media and the internet is slowly transforming the media landscape in the Philippines. More and more people are getting their news online.
It's not right that media workers have to put their lives on the line just for doing their jobs properly and ethically. The tragedy, of course, is that a free and robust press is of even greater significance, of even greater importance in a place like the Philippines, because when reporting the truth becomes dangerous, it also becomes more powerful.
Finally, Haiti remains a big news story, and it retains the attention of an American cartoonist named Mark Fiore. He's based in San Francisco and worked for the San Jose Mercury News before taking his skills online. Amidst all the news coverage on Haiti, there were a couple of incidents on the U.S. airwaves that caught Fiore's eye. The right-wing talk radio host Rush Limbaugh, who we mentioned before, was critical of American aid being sent to the victims. And Pat Robertson, a television evangelist, told his viewers that Haitians were suffering from God's will. They were paying the price, Robertson said, for making a deal with the devil back in 1804 to get out from under French colonial rule and the shackles of slavery. Fiore's cartoon, which is our web video of the week, implores everyone out there to stop arguing, stop blaming, and start helping. We'll see you next time at the Listening Post.
The Earth's crust first shifted, shaking quite madly, causing people to suffer and perish so sadly. Reaction was swift, it came on the fly, to a nation neglected for decades gone by. Aid was confused, it was jammed at the ports, there was voting and planning and pledges of sorts. But we've given them plenty of our income tax, said the portly talk host, sitting back to relax. Next came the God-man, a righteous old soul, who blamed the poor victims for being dead in a hole. There were politics, priorities, and pundits to spare. Meanwhile, grim death seemed to hang in the air. So forget who said what, red, pink, or blue. If there's good to be done, it should start now with you.